The old sycamore stood like a ghost in the moonlight, its white bark gleaming against the Arizona darkness. And Justice would not stop barking. Harper stumbled out of the cabin, boots half-laced, heart pounding from the kind of sleep that never quite settled in anymore, the kind that kept one ear always listening for danger that might never come. The German shepherd stood rigid at the base of the ancient tree, hackles raised, eyes fixed on something Harper could not see. Then he saw them. Footprints. Dozens of them, circling the massive trunk in a pattern that made his skin crawl. They were not animal tracks, not quite human either. 5 distinct toe marks, yes, but shaped wrong, too broad, with a curve like a hoof at the heel. Harper crouched down, running his fingers along the pressed earth, and the memory hit him like a rifle crack. Uncle Jim, 15 years gone, standing at this very spot, gripping Harper's shoulder with calloused hands, the old man's last words before he disappeared into these red rock canyons. The tree knows everything, but only the worthy will find it. Justice whined, a sound Harper had never heard. From him before, something between warning and beckoning, and in that moment Harper understood his dog was not alerting him to danger, but to destiny. Please support us by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Harper Stone had not planned on destiny when he came back from the Middle East with shrapnel scars and memories that woke him screaming. The Marine Corps had taught him to fight, to lead, to survive, but not how to live in a world that moved too fast and cared too little. The cabin his Uncle Jim left him sat at the edge of Redstone Valley, 10 miles from the nearest neighbor, surrounded by crimson cliffs and juniper trees that twisted like arthritic fingers toward an unforgiving sky. It was isolation, yes, but it was also peace of a sort. 3 years ago, Harper had driven past, a breeding facility being shut down for neglect, and there in a chain-link run sat a German shepherd, with eyes that understood combat fatigue without needing explanation. Justice had been half-starved, fur-matted, but when Harper opened that gate, the dog had simply walked to his truck and climbed in, like they had been waiting for each other all along. They did not need words. The two of them. Harper would wake at 3 in the morning, sweat-soaked and shaking, and Justice would already be there. Warm weight against his leg, steady heartbeat like a metronome pulling him back to the present. The dog knew when the memories were too loud, when the silence was too heavy, when Harper needed to walk the canyon trails until exhaustion finally granted him rest. This cabin, this valley, this dog. They had become the only family Harper trusted anymore. The sycamore tree itself was a landmark older than the town, older than the state, older than the nation, that had sent Harper to war. 800 years it had stood here, according to the Apache elders, its roots drinking from an underground spring that never ran dry, even in the worst droughts. Uncle Jim had brought Harper here as a boy, back when his parents were fresh in the ground, and grief was still a raw wound. They would sit beneath the massive canopy, and Jim would tell stories passed down from the Apache people who had lived in this valley long before settlers arrived with their claims and their cattle. "The tree is a spirit gate," Jim had said, his voice low and reverent. The ancestors placed it here to guard something precious, something sacred. Young Harper had thought it was just stories, the kind of tales old men told to make the world seem more magical than it was. But now, standing here with Justice pressed against his leg, Harper felt the weight of those words differently. He knelt again, brushing away loose soil near the base of the trunk where Justice had been digging. His fingers struck something metal, a tin box, rust-eaten and ancient, wedged between 2 thick roots. Harper pried it free, hands shaking, and inside found a leather journal, pages yellowed and brittle, and a hand-drawn map so faded he could barely make out the markings. Uncle Jim's handwriting. Harper's throat tightened as he opened to the first page and read the words that would change everything. The journal entries were frantic, written in the hurried scrawl of a man running out of time. Uncle Jim had discovered something in these canyons, something that had consumed his final months. A cave system, hidden and sacred, filled with Apache artifacts from before the forced relocations, before the wars, before history tried to erase an entire people. Jim had stumbled upon it while tracking a mountain lion, and he had understood immediately what it meant. These were not just relics. They were proof of heritage, of ceremony, of a civilization that deserved to be remembered and honored. But someone else knew. Someone dangerous. The journal spoke of shadowy figures watching the valley, of strangers asking questions in town, of threats whispered in parking lots. "I have to hide it deeper," Jim wrote. "They are closing in. If anything happens to me, justice will know. Justice will remember." Harper looked up from the page, confused, because his Justice was only 5 years old, had not even been born when Uncle Jim vanished. Then it clicked. Jim had owned a German Shepherd, too. The same name, the same fierce loyalty, the same uncanny intelligence. Harper had always assumed it was coincidence, but now he wondered if it was inheritance, if somehow the spirit of that first Justice had found its way into this one. His dog sat watching him with those knowing eyes, and Harper could have sworn the animal understood every word written on these pages, every secret buried in this red earth, every mystery waiting to be unearthed beneath the ancient sycamore's roots. Dawn came cold and copper-colored over Redstone Valley, and Harper drove the 20 miles into town with the journal tucked inside his jacket and Justice riding shotgun, alert as always. Kate Brennan's ranger station sat at the edge of the national forest boundary, a small wooden building that smelled like pine needles and old coffee. She looked up when Harper walked in, and her face shifted from surprise to concerned in the span of a heartbeat. Kate was the only person in this county Harper trusted besides Justice, a woman who had served 2 tours as an Army medic before trading combat zones for conservation work. She understood the silence that sometimes fell over him, the way certain sounds made him flinch, the reasons he preferred mountains to people. Harper laid the journal on her desk without preamble, and Kate read in silence, her jaw tightening with each page. When she finally looked up, her eyes held the weight of old grief. 15 years ago, your uncle filed a report about discovering an archaeological site, she said quietly. 2 weeks later, they found him at the base of Copper Ridge. Official report said accidental fall while climbing. Unofficial report, the one that never made it into files, said his equipment was tampered with, and there were signs of struggle. Kate paused, choosing her words carefully. A lot of people thought Jim was killed for what he found, but without evidence, without witnesses. The case went cold. Harper felt anger kindle in his chest, sharp and familiar. "Who would kill an old man over artifacts?" he asked. Kate's expression went grim. "People who see heritage as profit," she replied. Kate pulled a folder from her filing cabinet, unofficial records she had kept, because something about Jim Stone's death had never sat right with her conscience. There had been strangers in the area that summer, she explained, people asking questions about Apache ruins and offering money for information. One name kept appearing in witness statements: Felix Hartman. He was a collector, the kind who operated in legal gray zones, buying and selling indigenous artifacts to private buyers who did not care about provenance or ethics. Felix had approached Jim directly, offering substantial sums for location details, and Jim had refused. 2 witnesses reported seeing Felix's vehicle near Copper Ridge the day before Jim's body was discovered. But Felix had an alibi, a hotel receipt from Flagstaff, and without physical evidence, the investigation stalled. Kate tapped the journal. If this is real, if Jim really found a major cache of sacred items, then Felix never stopped looking. Harper's mind raced, connecting threads. And recently, Kate continued, I have had reports of someone surveying the area around your property. Expensive equipment, professional operation, asking landowners about cave systems and underground formations, The description matches Felix Hartman. He is older now, more careful, but he is back. Harper remembered a man who had come to the cabin 6 months ago, polished boots and practiced smile, asking casual questions about Uncle Jim's old hiking routes. Harper had sent him away with cold words and a warning not to return. Now he understood that warning had not been enough. Harper and Justice returned to the sycamore as the sun climbed higher, burning off the morning chill. This time, Harper brought climbing rope, carabiners, headlamps, and the old topographic maps Uncle Jim had marked up years ago. Justice moved differently now, with purpose that seemed to transcend normal canine behavior. The dog would stop at seemingly random points, nose working the air and ground, then look back at Harper as if to say, "Pay attention. This matters." Harper had worked with military dogs overseas, had seen how they could detect explosives and track enemies through impossible terrain, but Justice operated on another level entirely. The dog was not just following scents, he was reading the landscape like a text, understanding connections Harper could only guess at. They circled the sycamore in widening spirals, and Justice paused where the ground dipped slightly, a depression almost invisible beneath decades of accumulated leaves and soil. Harper cleared the debris and found what his uncle's map had indicated. A stone marker, carved with symbols that predated any language Harper recognized. Justice sat beside it, utterly still, waiting. Then Harper saw them. Fresh boot prints in the soft earth. Not his, not old. Someone else had been here within the last day. Someone wearing modern hiking boots with aggressive tread patterns. Someone who knew exactly where to look. The race had begun, and Harper was already behind. The old woman's house appeared around a bend in the canyon road, like something from another century, built from adobe and weathered wood, smoke rising from a chimney made of stacked river stones. Sarah Whitestone sat on her porch in a chair that had molded itself to her frame over decades, hands wrapped around a clay mug, eyes sharp despite the deep lines that mapped her face. Harper had met her only once before, at Uncle Jim's memorial service, where she had stood silent and apart, grieving in a way that spoke of old friendship. Justice approached her without hesitation, and Sarah smiled, reaching down to scratch behind his ears, with the familiarity of someone who understood animals as kin rather than pets. "You found the journal," she said. Not a question, but a statement. Harper nodded, unsure how she could know. Sarah gestured to a second chair. "Your uncle and I grew up together," she explained. "He was one of the few white men who listened when my grandfather spoke about the old ways, who understood that some places are not meant to be owned or exploited but protected. The sycamore marks a sacred cache, hidden by my ancestors when soldiers came to force us onto reservations. They buried ceremonial items, records of our history, proof that we existed here for thousands of years before borders and laws tried to erase us." Sarah's eyes grew distant. "The tree keeps the secret. The footprints are a curse to the greedy, a guide to the worthy." Sarah looked at Justice with an expression that made Harper's skin prickle. "This dog carries the spirit of a guardian," she said softly. "My grandfather used to say that certain animals are chosen by the land itself to protect what matters. Your uncle's Justice was one. This one is the same soul, returned." Harper wanted to dismiss it as mysticism, but he had seen too much in war zones, too many things that defied rational explanation, to reject anything outright. Sarah rose slowly, disappearing into her house, and returned with 2 items. The first was a small leather pouch on a cord, filled with herbs and marked with symbols. A protection charm, Apache tradition, worn by warriors going into danger. The second was a piece of cloth so old it felt like it might dissolve at a touch. A map, Sarah explained, drawn by her great-grandfather, showing the tunnel system beneath Redstone Valley in detail Uncle Jim's sketch had lacked. "The entrance through the sycamore is one way in," she said, "but there is another, an emergency exit that opens on the eastern cliff face. If you go down there, you will need both paths. She pressed the items into Harper's hands. Your uncle died protecting our heritage. Do not let his death be meaningless. Justice stood, ears forward, as if he too understood the weight of what was being asked. Harper tucked the map and charm away carefully, feeling the mantle of responsibility settle onto his shoulders like old familiar armor. The Mercer farm sat in a shallow valley 2 miles from Harper's cabin, a struggling operation of chickens and a few head of cattle surrounded by fields going brown from insufficient irrigation. Dalton Mercer was a decent man, worn down by hard circumstances, his face perpetually worried, shoulders bent from carrying loads too heavy for one person. Harper had helped him mend fences after a storm last spring, and Dalton had repaid the favor by bringing over firewood in winter. They were not friends exactly, but they were neighbors in the way that mattered out here, people who looked out for each other because no one else would. Today, though, Dalton looked worse than usual, jumpier, eyes sliding away when Harper asked casual questions about whether he had seen strangers around lately. Yeah, Dalton admitted finally. A guy came by a couple days ago asking about caves and old mining tunnels. Offered me good money, real good money, just to show him around the valley. His voice carried shame and desperation in equal measure. Times are tough, Harper. The drought killed half my herd, bank is circling, and this guy, Felix, he said his name was, he was offering enough to keep me afloat another year. Before Harper could respond, a little girl burst through the screen door, 8 years old with her father's eyes and untamed brown hair. Annie Mercer was a bright spot in her father's hard life, full of questions and fearless in the way only children could be. She ran to Justice, who tolerated her enthusiastic hugs with patient dignity. Daddy said he is taking the man to the big tree tomorrow, Annie announced innocently. The man with the fancy car who smells like leather. Dalton's face went white. Annie, inside now, he said sharply. The girl's smile faltered, confused by her father's tone, but she obeyed. Dalton turned to Harper, and for a moment he looked like he might cry. I am sorry, he whispered. I did not know what else to do. Harper felt pieces clicking into place, felt the timeline compressing. Tomorrow. Felix would move tomorrow, and Dalton, desperate and cornered, had become an unwitting accomplice. Harper gripped the man's shoulder. You have a choice now, he said quietly. Make the right one. Then he left. Justice at his heels, mind already planning for what had to come next. Night fell over Redstone Valley like a curtain dropping on a stage, and Harper sat in darkness inside his cabin, watching through the window as shadows moved near the sycamore tree. Justice had alerted 20 minutes ago, a low growl that meant strangers approaching, and Harper had killed the lights and waited. Now he could see them. 2 men with flashlights, moving with the careful efficiency of people executing a plan. They were setting something up near the tree's base, checking equipment, speaking in low voices that did not carry, but conveyed urgency. Harper slipped out the back door, Justice silent beside him, and they moved through terrain. Harper knew by heart, even in darkness. He got close enough to hear snippets of conversation, and his blood ran cold. The first voice was unfamiliar, gravelly and impatient. Boss wants this done tonight, before that veteran figures out what we are sitting on. The second voice, younger, nervous. What if someone comes? The first man laughed without humor. Then we make sure they do not leave. Felix is done playing nice. He has been waiting 15 years for this. We go in at midnight, grab what we can carry, and disappear before sunrise. Harper's hands clenched into fists. These were not archaeologists or historians. These were thieves, grave robbers preparing to loot sacred ground. Justice shifted beside him, muscles coiled, waiting for the command to attack. But Harper held him back. 2 against 2 were poor odds when the enemy was armed and prepared. They needed another approach, needed to get to the cave first, needed to understand what they were truly protecting. Harper watched as the men finished their preparations and walked back toward a truck hidden off the main road. He memorized faces, builds, the way they moved. Then he and Justice retreated to the cabin, and Harper pulled out Uncle Jim's journal and Sarah's map, spreading them across the kitchen table under lamplight. Midnight. That gave him 3 hours to do what his uncle had died trying to do. Protect the truth. Protect the heritage. Protect what mattered more than one man's life or comfort. Justice laid his head on Harper's knee, and Harper scratched the dog's ears, drawing strength from that simple contact. "All right, partner," he murmured. "Let us finish what Uncle Jim started." 3 in the morning found Harper and Justice moving through darkness so complete, it felt like walking through ink. Harper carried a backpack loaded with climbing gear, water, the journals, and a headlamp he refused to turn on until absolutely necessary. The moon had set an hour ago, leaving only starlight to navigate by, but Justice moved with absolute confidence, leading Harper along paths that seemed to materialize beneath their feet. The German Shepherd's night vision and instincts were far superior to any technology Harper possessed, and he had learned long ago to trust the dog completely. They reached the sycamore just after 3:15, and Harper paused, hand on the ancient trunk, feeling the rough bark beneath his palm. The tree radiated a presence he could not quite name, something that went beyond wood and chlorophyll into territory that made his rational mind uncomfortable. Justice circled the base twice, then stopped at the exact spot where Harper had found the tin box. The dog began digging, claws scraping earth and roots, and Harper knelt beside him with a small folding shovel. Within minutes they had exposed the flat stone Sarah's map indicated, carved with spiral patterns that seemed to move in the starlight. Harper wedged the shovel blade into a gap and pried upward. The stone shifted with a grinding sound that seemed impossibly loud in the pre-dawn quiet. Beneath it, darkness yawned like an open mouth, a shaft dropping straight down into the earth. Cold air rushed up, carrying scents of mineral and water, and something older. Something that had been sealed away from sunlight for generations. Harper pulled out his rope, secured it around the sycamore's trunk with a knot that had saved his life more than once in the mountains of Afghanistan, and tested the line with his full weight. Solid. He looked at Justice. "You ready, boy?" The dog's tail gave a single wag. Ready. Harper clicked on his headlamp and began his descent into the earth. The shaft dropped 30 feet through solid rock, walls smooth as if carved by water over centuries. Harper's boots scraped against stone, rope burning through his gloved hands as he controlled his descent. Above him, the entrance was a circle of stars growing smaller. Below, nothing but black. Then his feet touched bottom, solid ground, and he unclipped from the rope. The space around him opened up, his headlamp beam swallowed by distances it could not reach. "Justice!" Harper called up, and the dog did not hesitate. The German Shepherd launched himself into the void, trusting absolutely that Harper would catch him. Harper braced himself, and 70 pounds of muscle and fur hit his chest, nearly knocking him over. But he held firm. Justice landed lightly, shook himself once, then immediately put his nose to ground and began working. The cave they stood in was vast, cathedral-sized, with limestone formations hanging from a ceiling lost in shadow. Stalactites and stalagmites had grown together over millennia, creating columns that looked like frozen waterfalls. Somewhere in the distance, water dripped with metronomic precision, each drop echoing through the space. Harper's light caught something on the wall to his right, and he moved closer. Pictographs, images painted in red ochre and white clay, showing human figures and animals, the sun and moon, and at the center of the composition, A tree with spreading branches. The sycamore. This place was far older and far more significant than even Uncle Jim had understood. Justice barked once, sharp and urgent, and Harper turned to see the dog staring at the ground near the cave's far wall. Boot prints, fresh ones, the tread pattern clear in the thin layer of dust. Someone had been here recently, and not long ago. Harper's jaw tightened. They were not the first to find this place. Harper and Justice moved deeper into the cave system, following the boot prints and Justice's instincts in equal measure. The dog worked methodically, pausing every few yards to test the air, to listen to sounds Harper could not hear, to sense things that existed beyond human perception. In Afghanistan, Harper had seen military dogs locate insurgents in buildings with dozens of rooms, had watched them detect danger minutes before it manifested, had learned that sometimes the best intelligence came from 4 legs and a wet nose. Justice was doing that now, filtering information from 1,000 inputs, processing it with an intelligence that looked like magic, but was really just evolution and instinct honed to an incredible edge. The cave passage narrowed, forcing Harper to turn sideways to squeeze through gaps where stone had shifted over geological time. Justice slipped through easily, his lean frame built for exactly this kind of maneuvering. On the other side, the passage opened into another chamber, smaller than the first, but filled with something that made Harper stop breathing. Artifacts. Dozens of them, arranged carefully on natural stone shelves, pottery painted with geometric designs, obsidian blades napped with precision modern tools could barely match, baskets woven from yucca fiber, ceremonial masks carved from cottonwood. These were not random objects. This was a museum, a library, a time capsule created by people who knew their world was ending and wanted to preserve what mattered. Harper's headlamp swept across the collection, and his heart sank. Half the shelves were empty, dark rectangles in the dust showing where items had been removed. Recent removal. Someone had already looted this place. Justice suddenly went rigid, ears forward, a low growl building in his chest. Harper killed his headlamp instantly, plunging them into absolute darkness. He dropped into a crouch, one hand on Justice's collar, and listened with every sense he possessed. Voices. Faint but growing closer, echoing through stone passages in ways that made direction impossible to determine. Light flickered against the far wall, flashlight beams dancing through an opening Harper had not noticed. He pulled Justice behind a large stalagmite formation, pressing himself against cold stone, making his breathing shallow and silent. 3 figures emerged into the chamber, and Harper recognized the 2 men from earlier, plus a third, older, carrying himself with the authority of someone in charge. Felix Hartman. Harper had only seen him once before, but the man's face was burned into memory. Silver hair, expensive outdoor gear, and eyes that calculated value in everything they touched. Felix swept his flashlight across the remaining artifacts and smiled like a wolf evaluating sheep. "Beautiful," he murmured, his voice cultured, educated, utterly without remorse. Pre-contact Apache ceremonial items, probably 15th or 16th century. The private collector I represent will pay 7 figures for this haul. One of the men, the younger one, shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Hartman, are you sure about this? These are sacred objects, grave goods. If we get caught..." Felix's smile vanished. "We will not get caught," he said coldly, "because everyone who knew about this place is dead." He paused, his expression hardening further. "Jimstone tried to stop me 15 years ago, threatened to go to federal authorities, to the Apache Tribal Council, to anyone who would listen. So I made sure he could not. The admission hung in the air like poison. Murder, spoken as casually as discussing the weather. Justice's growl intensified, and despite Harper's grip, the dog barked, the sound explosive in the confined space. Felix spun, flashlight beam finding them instantly. "Well," the collector said, voice smooth as oil. "I wondered when you would show up, Mr. Stone." One of the men reached for something at his belt, and Harper saw the gun, saw the threat materializing. Justice did not wait for a command. The German Shepherd launched himself across the chamber, 80 pounds of protective fury, jaws targeting the gun hand. The man screamed as Justice's teeth clamped down, the weapon clattering across Stone. Harper charged forward, training and instinct taking over, tackling the second man before he could react. They hit the ground hard, wrestling in darkness broken only by wildly swinging flashlights. Felix shouted orders, trying to control the chaos, but the cave had become a maelstrom of violence. Harper's fist connected with jaw, knuckles splitting, pain shooting up his arm. The man beneath him bucked, throwing Harper off, and suddenly everyone was scrambling, fighting, flashlights smashing against rock. Justice had the first man pinned, snarling, keeping him down through sheer intimidation. Harper grappled with the second, their struggle carrying them toward the edge of the chamber where floor met wall in a sharp drop. Felix backed away, pulling out his own light, trying to escape the brawl. Then the cave itself rebelled. A deep grinding sound, like tectonic plates shifting, rumbled through the stone. Dust rained from the ceiling. One of the artifact shelves collapsed, pottery shattering with sounds like breaking bones. Everyone froze. Felix's face went pale. "Stop," he hissed. "Everyone stop moving. The ceiling is unstable. One wrong move and this whole section comes down." The violence drained from the chamber, replaced by terror that transcended human conflicts. Harper released the man he had been fighting, both of them backing away from each other slowly, eyes on the ceiling where cracks were spreading like spiderwebs through limestone. Justice released his hold, but remained ready, positioned between Harper and the threats. Felix's flashlight beam showed what Harper's tunnel vision had missed during the fight. This chamber sat beneath a natural dome, the ceiling thinned by centuries of water erosion, held up by pillars of stone that were now visibly cracked. Their fight had destabilized something that had been precarious for decades. Another grinding sound, deeper this time, and a chunk of rock the size of a basketball crashed down 10 feet from where Harper stood. Felix's expression shifted from anger to calculation to fear in rapid succession. "We need to get out now," he said. The cultured voice strained. "Everyone, back to the entrance." Slowly. The younger man started moving, but his partner, the one Justice had bitten, stepped wrong. His boot came down on loose rubble, and his ankle twisted. He fell hard, crying out, and the impact sent vibrations through the floor. A section of the far wall collapsed inward with a roar like artillery, and suddenly, the chamber was filling with dust and falling stone. Visibility dropped to nothing. Someone screamed. Harper could not tell who. Then through the chaos, cutting through the rumble of geological catastrophe, came another sound, a voice. Small, terrified, unmistakably young. "Help me, please, somebody help me." The voice came from beyond the new opening the collapse had created, from deeper in the cave system. Harper's blood turned to ice as he recognized it. Annie, Dalton Mercer's 8-year-old daughter. Annie was down here, trapped in the darkness, and the mountain was coming down around all of them. Harper spun toward Felix, grabbing the man's expensive jacket, slamming him against the cave wall hard enough to knock breath from lungs. "What is she doing here?" he snarled, and for the first time Felix Hartman looked genuinely shaken, the calculated composure cracking to reveal something almost human underneath. "I told Dalton to bring her," Felix admitted, words tumbling out fast. "Insurance. He owed me money, serious money, and I needed leverage to make sure he showed me the eastern entrance like he promised. I did not think she would wander off, did not think she would fall." Harper released him with a shove of disgust, every instinct screaming to beat this man unconscious. But Annie's voice called out again, weaker now, more frightened, and priorities crystallized with absolute clarity. Justice was already moving toward the collapsed section, nose working, tracking the girl's scent through dust and debris. Harper turned to the others, all of them coated in limestone powder like ghosts. "You want to live?" he said flatly. "You help me get that child out. Then we settle everything else." Felix nodded, something like shame flickering across his features. Dalton Mercer emerged from the shadows behind them, face streaked with tears, whole body shaking. He had been there the entire time, had witnessed everything, had heard Felix casually admit to murdering Jim Stone. "Oh, God," Dalton choked out. "Annie, baby, Daddy's coming." Harper pushed past him. "Stay focused or you are useless to her." Justice barked from the new opening, urgent and insistent, and Harper followed his dog into darkness that seemed to have no bottom. The collapse had revealed a passage that dropped sharply downward, more of a crevasse than a tunnel, walls pressing close on both sides. Harper had to turn sideways and shimmy through gaps barely wider than his shoulders, feet searching for purchase on slick stone. Behind him, Felix and his men followed, Dalton bringing up the rear, all of them connected now by shared desperation. Justice had disappeared ahead, his smaller frame able to navigate spaces Harper struggled through, but the dog's barking echoed back, a beacon in the labyrinth. "Annie?" Harper called. "Can you hear me?" "Sweetheart, keep talking so we can find you." Her voice came back thin and terrified. "I am stuck. My leg, it hurts so bad. I can see the doggy. Daddy, I am scared." Dalton sobbed openly, trying to move faster, scraping skin on stone in his panic. Harper forced himself to stay calm, to think tactically. Panic killed people in situations like this. Training and discipline saved them. The passage opened into a vertical shaft, and Harper's headlamp beam found Annie 15 feet below, wedged between two massive boulders that had shifted during the collapse. Her left leg was pinned from knee to ankle, and even from this distance Harper could see the unnatural angle of the bone. Justice sat beside her, licking her face, providing the only comfort available in this nightmare. The shaft was too narrow for an adult. Harper tried lowering himself down, got his head and shoulders through, but his chest would not fit past the bottleneck where the boulders met. He pulled back up, breathing hard, mind racing through options that all ended badly. Felix appeared beside him, looked down, and for once the smooth facade was completely gone. "We cannot reach her," the collector whispered. "Harper, we cannot get her out." Harper's jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. Justice could reach her. Justice was down there right now. But how could a dog solve what human hands could not? Harper laid flat on the stone, getting his face as close to the opening as possible, making eye contact with Annie, who stared up with eyes too wide, too shocked, sliding towards the kind of trauma that left permanent scars. "Annie," he said, keeping his voice steady and calm, like he was discussing weekend plans instead of life and death. "I need you to be very brave right now, braver than you have ever been. Can you do that for me?" The little girl nodded, tears cutting tracks through the dirt on her face. "I will try," she whispered. "Good girl," Harper continued. "Now listen carefully. We cannot fit down there to help you, but Justice can. Justice is the smartest, strongest dog I have ever known, and he is going to help get your leg free. But I need you to stay very still and very quiet. Can you do that?" Annie nodded again, one hand reaching out to clutch Justice's fur like a lifeline. Harper looked at his dog, and in that moment he felt the full weight of what Sarah Whitestone had said. This animal was not just a pet. Justice was a guardian, chosen by something larger than human understanding, carrying a purpose that transcended ordinary existence. "Justice," Harper commanded, using the tone reserved for serious work. "Dig. Left side. Carefully." The German shepherd's ears swiveled, processing, understanding. Then Justice began to dig at the base of the left boulder, not frantically but with methodical precision, Paws scooping away loose stone and ancient sediment that had accumulated over centuries. Dalton appeared at Harper's shoulder. "What is he doing?" the farmer asked desperately. Harper did not take his eyes off his dog. trying to create space. If he can shift the debris under that boulder, it might tilt enough to free her leg. It was a desperate plan, probably impossible, but it was the only plan they had. 20 minutes passed with agonizing slowness, each second marked by Justice's relentless digging and Annie's small whimpers of pain. The German shepherd's paws were bleeding now, claws worn down by stone, but the dog never slowed, never stopped, driven by something beyond physical limitation. Harper talked continuously, keeping Annie conscious and calm, telling her stories about Justice's bravery, about how dogs like him saved soldiers in combat zones, about how everything would be okay if she just held on a little longer. Dalton prayed in broken whispers, bargaining with God and the universe and anything that might be listening. Felix stood apart, watching in silence, and Harper wondered if the man had ever witnessed something that could not be bought or manipulated, if he understood yet what he had spent his life destroying in pursuit of profit. Then Justice stopped digging and looked up at Harper, and Harper saw it in the dog's eyes. "Trust me." Justice braced his front paws against the left boulder and pushed with every ounce of strength in his body. Muscles rippled beneath fur, tendons strained. The boulder shifted, just an inch, maybe less, grinding against its neighbor with a sound like a millstone. Annie screamed as pressure changed on her trapped leg. Harper's heart nearly stopped. Then Justice adjusted position, dug in harder, pushed again with a force that should not have been possible for an animal his size, and the boulder tilted another critical degree. Space opened between the rocks. Not much, but enough. "Annie," Harper shouted, "pull your leg out, now!" The girl yanked her leg free just as Justice's strength gave out, and the boulder settled back with a boom that shook the entire shaft. She was free. Broken leg. Traumatized. Terrified. But free. Harper fed the climbing rope down. Tied in a harness configuration, he could manage one-handed, while Dalton held the line taut. "Annie," he called down, "I need you to put your arms through these loops like a backpack. Justice will help you." "Can you do that, sweetheart?" Annie was crying too hard to answer with words, but she reached for the rope with shaking hands. Justice nosed the loops into position, incredibly gentle despite the urgency, helping the little girl slip her arms through. Harper pulled the rope snug, checked the knots with hands that had tied hundreds of these in training and combat, and looked at Dalton. "On 3, we pull together. Slow and steady. If we jerk the rope, we could hurt her worse." Dalton nodded, tears streaming, jaw set with determination. Felix and his men grabbed the rope behind them without being asked. Whatever crimes they had committed, whatever moral failures had led them to this moment, they were pulling together now for one innocent life. Harper counted down, and they hauled. Annie rose inch by inch through the shaft, her broken leg dragging, her face twisted in pain she was trying so hard to be brave through. Justice came with her, somehow finding purchase on the nearly vertical stone, climbing with a combination of strength and sheer stubborn will that defied physics. 10 feet, 7, 5. Harper reached down when she was close enough, grabbed her under the arms, and pulled her the rest of the way up. The moment she was clear, Dalton collapsed beside his daughter, wrapping her in his arms, sobbing apologies and prayers and promises he might not be able to keep, but meant with every fiber of his being. Harper sat back, breathing hard, and felt Justice press against his side. He buried his hand in the dog's fur, felt the rapid heartbeat, the exhausted trembling, the wounds that would need treating. "Good boy," he whispered. "Best boy, best friend. Hero." But the mountain was not finished with them yet. The collapse that had trapped Annie had been a warning, and now the warning was escalating to catastrophe. The ceiling began dropping dust in sheets, and the grinding sound that had stopped during the rescue resumed, louder now, more insistent. A crack appeared in the wall beside Felix's head, spreading like lightning across stone. "We have to move," Harper said. but even as the words left his mouth, he knew the truth. The entrance they had used was back the way they came, through chambers that were actively collapsing. They would never make it. Dalton looked up from Annie, understanding dawning in his desperate eyes. "We are trapped," he said. "We are all going to die down here." Harper pulled out Sarah Whitestone's cloth map, spreading it on the floor with hands that remained steady through discipline alone. "There is another way out," he said. "Eastern entrance, opens on the cliff face. The map shows a passage that should connect from this level." Felix leaned in, his collector's eye for detail suddenly useful. "There," he said, pointing to a junction marked with Apache symbols. "If we are where I think we are, that tunnel should be 100 yards north." Harper looked at Justice. "Can you find it, boy? Can you track fresh air?" Justice stood, shook himself once, then put his nose to the ground and began moving with renewed purpose. The group followed, stumbling through darkness as their world came apart around them. Stone rained from above. Passages they had traversed minutes ago sealed behind them with crashes that felt like death breathing down their necks. Annie clung to her father's back, and Dalton carried her despite exhaustion that made his legs shake. Felix and his men struggled under the weight of their own moral reckoning, faces hollow with the understanding that greed had led them into a tomb of their own making. Justice led them through a maze that seemed designed to disorient and destroy. But the dog never hesitated, never second-guessed, moving with the confidence of an animal connected to something humans could only dimly perceive. They squeezed through passages barely wide enough for their bodies, crawled across ledges with drops that vanished into black oblivion, waded through underground streams cold enough to steal breath and strength. Annie had stopped crying, gone quiet in that way that scared Harper more than screaming, her body limp against Dalton's back. Shock was setting in. They were running out of time in more ways than one. Then Justice barked, the sound different from before, triumphant rather than warning, and Harper's headlamp found what they had been praying for. A shaft leading upward, natural stone chimney worn by ancient water flow, and at the top, barely visible, the faint gray suggestion of pre-dawn light. The eastern entrance. It was real, and it was open, and it meant they might actually survive this, but climbing it would require everything they had left. The shaft rose nearly vertical for what looked like 40 feet, with minimal hand and footholds, walls slick with moisture. Harper tested the first section, found purchase barely adequate for someone with climbing experience, and knew immediately that Dalton would never make it while carrying Annie. None of Felix's men had the skills either. Only Harper could climb it, and only if he went alone. He looked at Justice, and the dog looked back, and understanding passed between them wordless and absolute. Harper would go up, secure the rope from above, and pull the others to safety. Justice would stay below, protecting them, guiding them, being the guardian he was born to be. It was the only way, and they both knew it. Harper began to climb, fingers finding cracks, toes jamming into weathered stone, moving with the muscle memory of hundreds of ascents in training and deployment. His shoulder burned where old shrapnel wounds had never quite healed right. His arms shook with fatigue. Twice his grip nearly failed, and only adrenaline and the knowledge that 7 lives depended on him kept his hands locked onto stone. Below, Justice paced, watching his human climb toward light, ready to catch him if he fell, even though there was no catching anyone from this height. 20 feet. 30. The gray light brightened, resolved into actual sky visible through an opening partially obscured by scrub brush. Harper's hand closed on the lip of the entrance, and he pulled himself out into the most beautiful dawn he had ever witnessed. He lay on solid ground for 5 seconds, allowing himself that moment of gratitude, then rolled to his feet and secured the rope around a boulder that looked older than human civilization. He dropped the line back into the shaft. "Dalton," he called down, "tie Annie in the harness. We are pulling her up first. It took coordination and communication and more trust than any of them had earned. But they made it work. Annie came up like cargo, unconscious now but breathing, and Harper laid her gently on the ground before dropping the rope again. One by one they ascended, Harper pulling when arms failed, Justice barking encouragement from below, the mountain groaning around them like a dying thing. Felix came up second to last, and when he emerged into daylight, he looked like he had aged a decade in a single night. The last was Justice, and Harper pulled the German shepherd up with hands that had no strength left, but found it anyway because failure was not an option. The moment Justice's paws touched solid ground, the cave system below collapsed with a roar that shook the cliff face. Dust exploded from the entrance they had just escaped, and when it cleared, the opening was gone, sealed by tons of fallen stone. They had made it out with seconds to spare. They were alive. All of them. And Justice, bleeding and exhausted, sat beside Harper and watched the sun rise over Redstone Valley like the guardian angel he had always been. The helicopter from Flagstaff Medical Center touched down in a clearing a quarter-mile from the eastern cliff face, rotors whipping red dust into spirals that caught the early morning light. Paramedics rushed to Annie first, stabilizing her leg with practiced efficiency, starting an IV for fluids and pain management, wrapping her in thermal blankets to combat shock. She opened her eyes once as they loaded her onto the stretcher, looked past her sobbing father, and found Justice sitting beside Harper. "Thank you, doggy," she whispered, words barely audible over the helicopter noise. Then she was lifting away, Dalton climbing in beside her, and Harper watched until the aircraft disappeared over the ridgeline heading east toward the city, and hospitals that could put broken bones and broken children back together. Kate Brennan arrived 30 minutes later with 2 county sheriff deputies, and the cleanup of the night's events began with questions that would take weeks to fully answer. Felix Hartman sat on a boulder with his hands already cuffed behind him, his expensive outdoor gear torn and filthy, his silver hair matted with limestone dust and the residue of shattered arrogance. His 2 associates sat nearby under guard, one of them nursing the arm Justice had bitten, both of them staring at nothing with the hollow eyes of men realizing their lives had just ended in every way that mattered. Kate listened to Harper's account with the grim expression of someone who had suspected corruption for years and was finally seeing it confirmed. When Felix began to speak, attempting to lawyer his way into a lesser narrative, she cut him off with a look that could have frozen fire. Felix Hartman was informed of his rights and charged preliminarily with murder in the death of James Stone, trafficking in stolen indigenous artifacts, child endangerment, and a list of federal crimes that would ensure he never saw freedom again. The evidence was overwhelming now. The artifacts still in Felix's possession matched descriptions from Uncle Jim's journal. The admission of Jim's killing had been witnessed by multiple people. The financial records Kate would subpoena would show 15 years of illegal sales to private collectors. As deputies led Felix toward a patrol vehicle, he stopped beside Harper, and for a moment, their eyes met. "I'm sorry," Felix said quietly, and it was impossible to tell if he meant it or if apology was just another transaction he hoped might buy him something down the line. Harper said nothing, because there were no words adequate to address a man who had murdered for profit and wrapped himself in the justification of collection and preservation. Felix had not preserved anything. He had stolen heritage, erased history, and killed a good man who had tried to stop him. Sorry was a word too small for crimes that large. Justice growled low as Felix passed, and the collector flinched, finally showing fear of something he could not control or contain. Then he was gone, loaded into a vehicle that would take him to a cell he richly deserved, and Harper felt a weight lift that he had not fully realized he had been carrying for 15 years. Uncle Jim's death had not been an accident. Now everyone would know. Now there would be justice, the concept and the dog both, serving their purpose in this Red Rock Valley. Kate approached with something wrapped in cloth, her expression softening into something that looked almost like reverence. "The tribal council was notified the moment I heard what happened," she said. "Sarah Whitestone is on her way, but she wanted me to give you this now." Kate unwrapped the cloth to reveal a carved wooden plaque, aged and beautiful, inscribed with Apache symbols and English text. It was a recognition of guardianship, the kind given to those who protected sacred spaces at personal cost. James Stone's name was carved there, along with a date from 15 years ago. "They made this after he died," Kate explained, even though his death was ruled accidental. The elders knew the truth. She turned the plaque over, and Harper's breath caught. Fresh carving on the back, the wood still pale where tools had cut. "Harper Stone and Justice, guardians of the sacred cache." Below that, in smaller script, a phrase in Apache that Kate translated. "The worthy inherit the duty. The ancestors choose their protectors." Harper took the plaque with hands that trembled despite his best efforts at control. He had come to Redstone Valley to hide from the world, to nurse wounds that might never fully heal, to exist in isolation because connection had become too painful. Uncle Jim had left him this cabin, this land, but also this inheritance, this purpose, and justice, impossible and extraordinary justice, had somehow known, had carried forward a mission across generations, had been exactly what Harper needed without Harper understanding what he needed at all. Kate put a hand on his shoulder. "Your uncle would be proud," she said simply. Then she walked away to coordinate with the arriving tribal representatives and federal agents whose jurisdictions overlapped in complicated ways that would take months to sort out legally. Harper sat on the ground, justice pressing against his side, and together they watched the valley wake under a sun that burned away the last shadows of a very long night. Sarah Whitestone arrived as the sun climbed toward noon, driven by her grandson in a truck that had seen better decades. She moved slowly, age and arthritis making every step deliberate, but her eyes were bright and fierce as she approached Harper. Justice stood to greet her, tail wagging, and Sarah cupped the dog's face in weathered hands. "You did well, guardian," she said to the dog. "Your ancestor would be honored." Then she turned to Harper. "Walk with me." They moved together toward the sycamore tree, which stood undamaged despite the collapse of the cave system beneath it, roots going down so deep that human violence and geological catastrophe could not touch its foundation. Sarah placed both palms against the white bark, closed her eyes, and spoke words in Apache too fast for Harper to follow. A prayer, perhaps, or a report to ancestors about duties fulfilled. When she opened her eyes again, they were wet. "My great-grandfather hid those artifacts when soldiers came to force our people onto reservations," she said. "He knew that white men would see them as curiosities or commodities rather than sacred objects tied to our identity and survival. He trusted the land to keep them safe until a time when they could be honored properly. Your uncle found them by accident, but he understood their significance immediately. He became their guardian without being asked, simply because it was right." She looked at Harper with an intensity that felt like being seen all the way to the soul. "Now you carry that duty. The cave is sealed, but the artifacts that remain will be transferred to the tribal museum. They will be studied by our people, displayed with proper context, used to teach our children who they are and where they come from. Your uncle died for that. You nearly died for that. Justice bled for that. This is what it means to be worthy. Not wealth or power, but sacrifice for something larger than yourself." Harper and Sarah stood together beneath the sycamore for a long time, not speaking, simply being present in a place that had witnessed centuries of history and would witness centuries more. Eventually, Sarah's grandson came to take her home, but before she left, she pressed something into Harper's hand, a seed pod from the sycamore, dried and ancient. "Plant it somewhere that matters to you," she said. Let the guardian tree spread its roots. Then she was gone, and Harper was alone with justice and the valley, and a future that looked different than it had 24 hours ago. He could not go back to isolation, could not pretend that connection and community and purpose were things he could live without. Uncle Jim had understood that. Justice understood it better than any human. The world was full of things worth protecting. Heritage and history, and innocent children and truth itself. And Harper had skills and experience, and a dog who was basically a miracle. And maybe that meant something. Maybe that meant the war was not over, but had simply changed theaters. Maybe that meant Harper Stone still had missions to complete, and justice would be beside him for every single one. He scratched behind the dog's ears, felt the familiar comfort of that contact, and made a decision that felt like waking up after a very long sleep. They would stay in Redstone Valley, but they would not hide anymore. They would protect what needed protecting, fight what needed fighting, and be the guardians that Sarah's ancestors had somehow known would come when called. Justice looked up at him with those knowing eyes and barked once, sharp and certain. Agreement, partnership, the beginning of something that had actually started a long time ago and was only now being recognized for what it truly was. The weeks that followed brought changes that rippled through Harper's life like stones dropped in still water. Annie recovered well, the break clean enough that doctors predicted full healing without permanent damage. Dalton sold his struggling farm and moved his daughter to Flagstaff, where opportunities were better and memories were less traumatic. But before he left, he came to Harper's cabin with tears and gratitude and an apology that Harper accepted, because holding grudges helped no one. The Tribal Council established a permanent archaeological protection program, funded by federal grants and staffed by Apache scholars who would ensure their heritage was preserved by their own people rather than exploited by outsiders. Kate took on oversight responsibilities, and Harper found himself volunteering as a field consultant, using his military tracking and security experience to patrol sensitive sites and train others in protection protocols. Justice became something of a legend, the dog who had saved a child and protected sacred ground, and children from the reservation would visit sometimes just to meet him. Harper started teaching outdoor skills to veterans struggling with reintegration, using the valley and justice as tools for healing the kind of wounds that never showed on X-rays. He was not a therapist, but he understood the weight of service and the difficulty of finding purpose after war, and sometimes understanding was enough. Justice worked with him in these sessions, demonstrating that loyalty and courage were not bound by species. That connection could exist across every divide if you were brave enough to trust. Harper thought about Uncle Jim constantly during those weeks, remembering conversations from childhood, understanding now what the old man had been trying to teach about responsibility and heritage, and standing for something beyond personal comfort. Jim had died alone in darkness, defending objects most people would never see or appreciate. And there was tragedy in that. Yes, but also profound dignity. He had made a choice about what mattered, and he had paid the price without hesitation or regret. Harper stood at the memorial Kate had helped him erect near the sycamore, reading the inscription aloud while Justice sat attentive beside him. James Stone, guardian of sacred heritage. The words were simple, but they contained everything important about a life well lived. Harper placed fresh flowers, made a promise to the memory of the man who had raised him, and felt Justice lean warm and solid against his leg. The dog understood grief, understood remembrance, understood that the best way to honor the dead was to continue their work with the living. On a cool evening 2 months after the cave collapse, Harper sat on his cabin porch watching sunset paint the valley in shades of crimson and gold, while Justice dozed at his feet. A truck rumbled up the dirt road, and Kate emerged carrying a folder thick with official-looking documents. She dropped into the chair beside him with a sigh of exhaustion. "The federal case against Felix is airtight," she reported. "He is looking at 25 to life, and his associates are cooperating in exchange for reduced sentences. The artifacts recovered from his storage facilities have been returned to 6 different tribes across the Southwest." She paused, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "The Apache Council wants to offer you a formal position as Cultural Heritage Protection Coordinator. It comes with a small salary, a lot of responsibility, and the certainty that you will spend a significant portion of your life in courtrooms testifying against people who see Indigenous history as something to be bought and sold." Harper considered this, watching the way light caught the sycamore's white bark and turned it luminous. A year ago, he would have refused, would have retreated deeper into isolation, would have convinced himself that he had nothing left to offer anyone. But justice had taught him differently. Justice had shown him that purpose was not something you chose, but something that chose you. And when it did, you could either answer or spend the rest of your life wondering what you had been too afraid to become. "I will do it," Harper said quietly, and Kate's smile widened into something genuine and warm. "Good," she replied, "because we need people like you. People who understand that some things are worth fighting for even when there is no glory in it, no recognition, just the quiet knowledge that you did what was right." She stood to leave, then paused. "By the way, there is a veteran support group meeting in town Thursday nights. A few guys from different eras and conflicts, just talking, supporting each other. You should come. You might find it helpful." She did not wait for an answer, just climbed back in her truck and drove away, leaving Harper alone with justice and the valley and a future that suddenly contained possibilities he had stopped believing in. Harper looked down at Justice, who had woken and was watching him with those eyes that seemed to see everything Harper tried to hide from himself. "You know what this means, right?" Harper said to the dog. "No more quiet isolation. No more hiding from the world. We are going to be involved, committed, responsible for things beyond our own peace of mind." Justice's tail thumped against the porch boards twice, which Harper had learned to interpret as enthusiastic agreement. Harper smiled despite himself, reaching down to scratch the spot behind Justice's ears that always made the dog's back leg kick. "Uncle Jim used to tell me that fighting is not just what happens on battlefields," Harper said aloud, giving voice to thoughts that had been circling his mind for weeks. He said sometimes the most important fights are the quiet ones, the ones where you stand between what is precious and what threatens to destroy it. He said soldiers understand that better than most people because we have seen what happens when good people do not stand up. I did not understand what he meant back then. I thought fighting meant enemies and weapons and clear objectives. But he was talking about this, guarding heritage, protecting the vulnerable, being willing to sacrifice comfort for principle. You understood it before I did, partner. Somehow you knew exactly what we were supposed to be doing, and you dragged me along until I figured it out too." Justice yawned, utterly unbothered by the weight of Harper's gratitude and philosophy, content simply to exist in this moment on this porch with his human beside him. It was, Harper thought, the perfect response. Overthinking was a human failing. Dogs understood that sometimes you just did what needed doing without analyzing it to death first. The sun touched the horizon, and the valley filled with that brief perfect light that photographers spent lifetimes chasing. Harper pulled out his phone and took a picture, not to share but to remember, this exact moment when everything changed and nothing changed, when he understood finally that he had been healing all along without realizing it, that justice had been therapy and purpose and salvation wrapped in fur and loyalty and impossible courage. The next video in our series is appearing on your screen right now. Another story about the incredible bonds between veterans and the animals who save them in ways medicine and time cannot. Click it to continue this journey with us. If you have ever had a loyal companion who pulled you through dark times, share your story in the comments below. We want to hear about your heroes, the ones with 4 legs and hearts bigger than logic can explain. And please subscribe to this channel so we never stop telling these stories, so the world keeps remembering that courage comes in many forms and loyalty knows no species. To all veterans and your families, to everyone who has served and sacrificed, we see you, we honor you, and we are grateful beyond words for everything you have given. Harper Stone and Justice still live in Redstone Valley, still patrol the sacred sites, still stand guard over heritage and history and the truth that some things are worth protecting, even when the cost is high. The sycamore tree still stands, 800 years old and counting, roots going down to bedrock, branches reaching toward sky, a silent witness to all the small heroic acts that never make headlines but change the world one saved life at a time. Justice is getting older now, gray appearing around his muzzle, but his eyes remain sharp and his purpose remains clear. He is a guardian, chosen by forces Harper will never fully understand, carrying forward a duty that transcends any single lifetime. And Harper has learned to trust that, to believe in things larger than himself, to fight battles that matter even when no one is watching. They walk the valley together each morning at sunrise, man and dog, protector and protected, both and neither, simply 2 souls who found each other when they needed it most and built something unbreakable from loyalty and sacrifice and love that asked for nothing except the chance to be itself. That is the story. That is what matters. That is what endures long after caves collapse and criminals face justice and little girls heal from broken legs and nightmares. The bond between Harper and Justice, guardian and guardian, warrior and warrior, friend and friend, forever and always, watching over Redstone Valley beneath the ancient sycamore tree that knows all secrets and keeps them safe for those who prove themselves worthy of the trust. If this story reminded you that the most loyal friends ask for nothing but the chance to stand beside you in your darkest hour, drop a comment 15 to honor the 15 years Justice and Harper waited to bring Jim Stone's killer to justice and prove that truth never dies. It just waits for the worthy to uncover it.